The sky had gone the color of a fresh bruise when Thomas saw the preacher's wife running up the ranch road her. Coat was unbuttoned, flapping wild in the wind, her gray streaked, hair loose from its pins and whipping across her face. She was 61 years old and had never run anywhere in her life that Thomas knew of yet here. She came stumbling over the frozen ruts, one hand pressed to her side, the other reaching toward his house, like she could pull it closer. Maul he had been splitting kindling with and started toward her fast as his knees allowed. By the time he reached her, she was bent over, gasping, white clouds bursting from her mouth. Ruth, he said, steady, catching her arms. What's happened? She looked up at him, eyes wide and wet with terror. Please, Thomas, hurry. Elijah Felley's in the church. He won't move. I can't lift him. I think it's his heart. Thomas did not waste breath on questions. He turned and jogged to the pickup, keys already in his hand. From morning chores, Ruth climbed in beside him, shaking so hard the seat creaked. He threw the truck into gear and they tore down the road, gravel pinging under the fenders. The little white church sat at the crossroads, its steeple light glowing soft against the storm coming on. Thomas took the steps two at a time, Ruth right behind him. Inside, the air smelled of candle smoke and old hymnals and fear. Preacher Elijah lay on his back in front of the altar steps, one hand clutching his chest, the other stretched toward the pulpit like he had been reaching for his notes when the pain took him. His face was gray, his lips blue, but his eyes were open and fixed on Ruth. Thomas knelt hardwood, biting his knees. He loosened Elijah's tie and collar buttons, quick and sure, the way he had done for men hurt in branding accidents and barn-raising. See, felt for the pulse in the preacher's neck. Faint, but they're still with us, he said low. Hold on. Reverend Ruth dropped beside them, clutching her husband's hand, tears running silent. Elijah tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Thomas looked at the big oak pulpit, then at the narrow aisle, and knew there was no getting a stretcher in here. Easy Storm was fixing to dump 2 feet of snow before midnight. Roads would close. They had minutes, not hours. He made the decision the way a man decides to cut a calf to save the cow. No time for ceremony. Ruth, I am going to carry him to the truck. You open doors and keep talking to him. Keep him here. She nodded, once fierce and steady, now that someone else was giving orders, slid one arm under Elijah's shoulders, the other under his knees, and lifted the preacher. Had lost weight these last years, but he was still a tall man, and the pain made him rigid. Thomas felt his own back scream, but he locked his jaw and stood. Ruth ran ahead, flinging the doors wide, cold wind roaring in. Thomas carried Elijah down the aisle, slow and steady, the way he had once carried each of his own children when they fell asleep in church and did not want to be woken. Elijah's head rested against Thomas's shoulder, his breath wet and shallow, almost their brother. Thomas said soft, stay with me now, Ruth. As got coffee at the house, and she's been saving the good bourbon for Christmas. You don't want to miss that. Ghost of a smile touched Elijah's mouth. Thomas got him into the warm cab, laid him across the seat with his head in Ruth's laps. She cradled him close, stroking his forehead, humming the old hymn-blessed assurance under her breath, the one they had sung at their wedding 52 years ago. Thomas drove careful but fast, tires spinning on the ice once and correcting smooth. He radioed the county clinic on the CB, told them what was coming. They said the ambulance was stuck 20 miles north, but Doc Hansen would be waiting at the door. Snow started while they were still a mile out, big soft flakes that stuck to the windshield and blurred the world. Thomas leaned forward, squinting, keeping the truck in the flak. Squinting, keeping the truck. And the ruts by memory and prayer. Ruth never stopped, humming. Elijah's eyes stayed open, fixed on her face, like she was the only solid thing left in the world. They slid to a stop in front of the little clinic, lights blazing warm against the storm. Doc Hansen and 2 nurses ran out with the stretcher. Thomas got out and helped lift Elijah, gentle as handling a newborn foal. Ruth walked beside the stretcher, holding her husband's hand all the way inside. Thomas followed, snow melting off his coat onto the linoleum. They took Elijah straight to the back. Thomas and Ruth stood in the hallway, holding each other up because neither could stand alone. Just then, after a while, Doc came out, wiping his hands on a towel. He's stable, he said. Bad angina, not a full infarction. This time, nitroglycerin and oxygen did the trickies, asking for both of you. They went in together. Elijah lay propped on pillows, color coming back into his face, an oxygen tube under his nose. He looked small under the white blanket, but his eyes were clear. He reached for Ruth. First, she took his hand and pressed it to her cheek, tears falling again, but different now then. He looked at Thomas and lifted his other hand. Slotimus took at the preacher's fingers, thin but warmth. Thank you, brother, Elijah whispered. You carried meal like the good shepherd. Thomas shook his head, just did what needed doing. Ruth leaned over and kissed Elijah's forehead, then turned and kissed Thomas's cheek, quick and fierce, the way a sister thanks. Brother, you gave me more years with him, she said, voice breaking. I will never forget. It never. Thomas felt his throat close. He squeezed Elijah's hand once and let go. You two got a lot of sermons left to argue over, he said. Gruff, didn't waste them. Elijah managed a real smile. Then, outside, the snow kept falling thick and silent, covering the valley like gray stomas. Drove Ruth home later after Elijah was sleeping and the storm had closed every road for the night. They sat in the warm kitchen of the parsonage, drinking tea, neither speaking much, just letting the quiet settle gentle around them. After a while, Ruth reached across the table and covered Thomas's big, rough hand with her small, soft one. You know, she said, quiet people think preachers' wives don't get scared. We dow get terrified. Night, I thought I was going to be alone, and then you came like you always have for 50 years whenever any of us needed carrying. Thomas turned his hand over and held hers. Neighbors, he said. That's all. No, she answered. Firm family. That's what you always have been. They sat like that until the kettle cooled and the clock struck 2. Then Thomas walked home through the deep new snow, his tracks the only mark on the white road. He hung his coat by the stove and stood a long time looking at the picture of Martha on the mantel, smiling soft in her Sunday dress. I did all right tonight, didn't I, darlin'? He whispered. Dan. Somehow he knew she was proud. Years later, when Elijah finally did go home gentle, in his sleep with Ruth holding his hand, Thomas was one of the pallbearers. He carried the preacher one more time, slow and steady, down the same church island. When they lowered the casket, Ruth stood straight and strong beside the grave and spoke the words clear into the cold March wind he was carried all his life by love, and in the end love carried him home. Thomas stood bareheaded in the snow, feeling the truth of it settled deep in his bones. Some burdens are heavy, some loads are sacred, and sometimes all a man can do show up, lift on, carry until the carrying is denied. That is enough. More than enough is everything.